In this video, we're going to be looking at triplex pumps. I'm going to show you all of their main parts. I'm going to show you some of the different designs that you may have. Then I'm going to show you how they work. And we'll discuss briefly some of the applications where you're likely to see triplex pumps. Here is a triplex pump. It's quite a bulky item. That's why we've got a lifting eye on the top over here for lifting it into position. Now don't worry about this side so much. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's come over to here and we'll run through some of its main parts. So the first main part that we're going to look at is this item here. It looks like a long cylinder. It is a plunger. The other item that you may see in this space other than a plunger is a piston. What's the difference? We'll get to that in a moment. Just off to the left here, we've got a seal. That's this black item over here. Then we've got some sort of connection here where we mechanically connect our connecting rod to the crankshaft. The crankshaft is similar to what you would see in a car. They have a central rotational axis, and that allows us to get a stroke of a piston. You see here, if we go from this position here and we go ahead, that represents a single stroke. If we were to go back again, that represents another stroke. Let's continue our little tour though. We'll come over here. We've got a suction inlet. That's this green arrow pointing inwards. We've got a suction non-return valve. That's this ball here with a spring. And then we've got a discharge non-return valve. Again, that's a ball with a spring on top. Let's now go onto the opposite side of the pump. Here we've got our discharge, where the process fluid comes out. And then we've got quite a few different items here. Let me start by explaining to you what system all of this equipment belongs to. It all belongs to the lubricating oil system. We go down here, we've got an oil gauge. It looks like someone's painted our piece of glass blue, which is unfortunate because now we can't see what the lubricating oil level is. You may laugh, but I can tell you this has happened a few times in my career. People come in here, they paint all of the bolts, they paint all of the nuts, they paint over the glass, and it all looks really pretty. Right up until you need to do some maintenance and you realise all of the spanners and the shifters and the wrenches no longer fit onto all of these nice nuts because you've got to chip all the paint off. With our glass here though, what we do is exchange the glass or scratch off the paint so that we could see the oil level. We've then got an oil pump, that's this item. We've got an oil pressure regulator. We've got an oil filter. Over here we've got an oil pressure gauge, and then we've got a pressure differential switch. All of these parts work together as part of the lubricating oil system. The gauge is there so that we can check the oil level if someone hasn't painted it. The oil pump is there to circulate oil through the system. The pressure regulating valve is there to regulate the pressure of the lubricating oil system, as the name implies. And then we've got a filter here to filter the lubricating oil before it goes back into our pump through this connection. This gauge over here gives us a local indication of what the oil pressure is within our oil system. Typically you're looking at between 3 and 4 bar. That's typical for a lot of machinery, although there are cases where it varies. I can think of one example in a large marine two-stroke engine where you'll get pressures as high as 20 bar, but that's very, very specific. It's actually for a crosshead in an engine, which is not very common. Anyway, I'm sure there's other examples as well. Here we have a differential pressure switch, or switches. What we're going to do, we're going to use those switches to measure the oil pressure in the system. If we get a low level, we're going to get an alarm. If we get a low level, or that is to say a very low level, we trigger a shutdown of the pump. So that's how we can protect the pump, by measuring the pressure of the lubricating oil system and ensuring that if it is low, we can at least activate an alarm to alert engineers, or if it's very low, we shut down the pump and protect the pump. The lubricating oil is used to lubricate the bearings and sometimes the seals within the pump. It depends on the design. The filter is just to make sure we're not sending any foreign bodies, any little bits of metal that have come off the bearings, any bits of dirt. We're not sending those back into the pump. That's why we have this filter here. Normally you just grab it, you'll unscrew it. Works a bit like a bolt going into a nut. You'll turn it anti-clockwise. Sometimes you might need a strap or something like that. And then you can undo the filter and change it. It may also be a strainer as well, in which case you'll clean it and then reinstall it again. More likely though, it will be a filter because they're able to finely filter lubricating oil compared to strainers which are less effective for fine filtration. So now we've covered this side, let's go and have a look at how this pump works. Now this pump is very interesting for several reasons, but one of the reasons it's interesting for me is because when I was getting prepared for this video, I noticed a mistake. And I'm going to explain to you how I came to this conclusion, and then you can have a think about it as well and see if I'm correct. But let's see how this pump works. First, we've got the plunger over here. As I mentioned, it may also be a piston. Plungers are used for higher pressure systems. They're effectively cylinders, as you can see from this angle. We've got the bore. I'll back it up a moment, I'll be able to get in there. We've got the bore of the plunger, the diameter of which is indicated now. And then we've got the length of the plunger, which is indicated now. Plungers have a long cylindrical shape, pistons do not. They have a much smaller length to bore ratio. Not only that, pistons usually have piston rings for sealing, whereas plungers rely on fine tolerances or a static seal. What I mean here when I talk about a static seal is a seal that does not move with the plunger itself. Our static seal in this case is over here. It's this black item. So the plunger and the shaft will move through the seal back and forth linearly, but the seal will remain in position. Piston rings, they move with the piston. So that's a different way of sealing. Higher pressure systems though will use plungers, not pistons. Also, if you've got a fluid that's very viscous, it has a high resistance to flow, a pump with a plunger will be a better choice than a pump with a piston. Keep that in mind. Not only that, if the process fluid has a lot of contaminants, bits of stone or things that are abrasive, piston rings won't cope with that very well because they're rubbing against the cylinder, that is indicated here, and those abrasive particles get stuck sometimes between the piston rings and the cylinder. Technically speaking, the piston rings should not be pressing up against the cylinder anyway. We use lubricating oil to get into the gap between the piston rings and the cylinder. That's how we get our seal. But abrasive action can occur if we get abrasive material between the piston rings and the cylinder. That's why we opt for these plungers, and they can have very fine tolerances within the cylinder. Because our plunger body is so long, it also helps it align with the cylinder quite well, whereas a piston does not have a long body. So what's the mistake that I spotted earlier? The mistake that I spotted earlier is simply that the seal seems to move with the rest of the model. This took me a while to figure out, because when I was going through the model, I was looking at it and I was thinking, okay, I know what plungers are used for, I know what pistons are used for, where's the sealing arrangement? And I couldn't figure it out. So I went through here and I looked around trying to figure out where the sealing arrangement would be. Then I started to think about, okay, maybe there is no sealing arrangement, maybe it's some sort of process fluid that's allowed into the crankcase, but that also creates issues if that occurs. Let me give you an example. If we allow process fluid into the crankcase over here, or even into this intermediate position, this cavity over here, we need to have a larger pressure boundary. We already know that our plungers are there to cater for a higher pressure system. If that's the case, why would we want to extend that process fluid into a different area where we need to then have a pressure boundary that's much larger? We risk not only that we'll get a crack or a fracture or some sort of leak, but also by having a larger pressure boundary, it costs more money. Another problem with allowing process fluid into this area, and especially the crankcase, is that if that process fluid is abrasive, if it's flammable, remember it could be a liquid, slurry, gas, we don't know what the process fluid is, but if it gets into this space and it's flammable, imagine for a moment that there's some hot bearings here. Imagine for a moment those bearings get so hot that they ignite that flammable process fluid. We're then going to get a pump that essentially explodes. You may think that I'm going into the creative realms here and doing a work of fiction, but that's exactly what happens on large marine two-stroke engines. They have something called a crankcase explosion. On smaller two-stroke engines, you can pressurize the crankcase, and you often will. Not only that, but there'll be a little bit of lubricating oil in the air that gets drawn into the two-stroke engine crankcase. But these engines are very small. But hopefully you can see now why I think this seal should be in this position here. You can see it even lines up quite nicely, and why it should not move with all of the other parts of the pump. There's another thing that also was a bit of a giveaway, or at least pushed me in this direction towards making my conclusions, and that is the length of the stroke. If we go over here, the length of the stroke is going to be roughly between these two lines. It's about the same distance. So that means if this plate and this seal were static and the other parts move linearly, this pump design would make sense. Anyway, that's just my own little theory. I don't know if I'm correct. Have a think about it yourself, but we are most likely going to update this model and get that changed once we've checked out if my conclusions are correct. Let's go back to how the pump works though. We've got a suction inlet here being drawn into the pump, and we've got 3 suction connections. You can see at the top of the screen here, and again here, and again here. Those 3 connections connect to what we call the suction manifold. Then we've got a non-return valve. This non-return valve moves up and down depending on the pressure difference across the valve. When we have a suction pressure on this side of the valve, for example, acting on the non-return valve from the cylinder, what's going to happen is that ball is going to move upwards. Notice the plunger moves away, the ball moves up. The plunger moves away, the ball moves up. As it does so, it compresses this spring. When the plunger begins to move back towards the ball, what's going to happen is that ball is going to go down. See here, let me just play this at slow speed. Plunger's moving in, the ball is down. Plunger's moving away, the ball moves up. The differential pressure across that ball causes it to move. When we have a suction pressure coming from the cylinder, the ball is sucked upwards off the seat. When we have a positive pressure, as the plunger moves towards the ball is pressed down onto the ball's seat, and flow can no longer go into our suction manifold. So let's go through that again. The plunger now is going away, we're drawing fluid into the cylinder. The plunger now returns, the suction valve closes, but what's going to happen is all that fluid that's gone into our cylinder, it needs to be discharged somewhere. Since it can no longer pass through these ports, here is one, and we can actually see another over here where my mouse is. Since it can no longer pass through those ports, it's going to go upwards and pass through a different set of ports. You can see a port indicated where my mouse is. These go all the way around. They'll be on the opposite side as well. The fluid enters through those passages, presses our suction ball downwards, but it's allowed to flow upwards and lift this second non-return valve off its seat. So plunger here, moving away. Now it's coming back. You can see immediately when it starts moving back towards the valves that the discharge valve, this one here, the ball lifts off the seat and the fluid begins to exit out of the cylinder because it can't exit out of our suction valve. So that's what a non-return valve does. It only allows flow in a single direction. Non-return valves are also called check valves. They're also called unidirectional valves. If you see them installed in the base of some hand pumps, they'll also be called foot valves. So many different names for the same thing. They allow flow in only one direction. So the pressure is increasing in our cylinder, it's lifting up our discharge valve, and then the process fluid is being discharged into our discharge manifold. Our discharge manifold is exactly the same as the suction manifold, has a slightly different setup, but essentially it is here. The process fluid comes out of the discharge manifold and it will continue on its way through the system. There are 3 discharges that connect onto our discharge manifold, and there are 3 suctions that connect onto our suction manifold. This is simply because we've got 3 plungers within our pump. You can see the plungers over on the back here. If I play the animation, we can watch them all moving in and out. Can even speed it up a little bit. And that is essentially how the pump works. To balance vibrations within the pump and also to balance the discharge from the pump, we call these discharges pulsations, we stagger the plungers so that when one is at the end of a discharge stroke, the other is at the start of a suction stroke, and then the third will be between the 2 strokes. This way we get a much more constant stream of fluid coming out of our discharge manifold. If they all sucked and discharged at the same time, the pump would vibrate excessively and we get large pressure pulsations within our system, We don't want that. We want things to be smooth. We want things to work economically. So in order to achieve this, we're going to have 3 plungers and we're going to stagger them so that one is sucking, one is discharging, and one is between those 2 stages. Because triplex pumps, like this one here, are positive displacement pumps, we do need to have a pressure relief device on the discharge manifold, which although it's not shown here, there will be one. We don't want to continually increase the pressure within a system to breaking point or to the point at which it fails, and that's why we have a pressure relief device. Another characteristic of positive displacement pumps is that they can pump air. I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction into triplex pumps. If you want to learn more about pumps, valves, turbines, and anything else related to engineering, then be sure to visit saVRee.com. We've got over 500 interactive 3D models, just like this one. You can use them to teach or instruct, or you can access over 100 hours of video lessons, tutorials, and courses, just like this one. Don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn if you haven't already done so, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for your time.